In our modern world, we are told there is a holy grail for a happy life, a single quality we must pursue at all costs. It is whispered in self-help books, shouted in motivational seminars, and chased relentlessly on social media. That quality is self-esteem. We are taught to build it, to protect it, to raise it. We believe that if we can just achieve a high enough level of self-esteem, we will finally be confident, happy, and whole. But what if this entire chase is a trap? What if the very pursuit of self-esteem is the source of our deepest anxieties? Carl Jung, the great explorer of the human psyche, offered a perspective that challenges this entire modern obsession. He saw the relentless quest for self-esteem not as a path to healing, but as a symptom of a deeper disconnection. He believed that pop psychology had given us a fragile, flickering candle and told us it was the sun. This journey is about uncovering that profound difference. We will deconstruct the fragile mirror of self-esteem and expose why it is destined to crack. And then, we will introduce Jung's revolutionary alternative, a connection to a deep, unshakable foundation within you that is not based on judgment or achievement, a core of your being that is beyond comparison. He called it the self. This is not just a change in terminology. It is a fundamental shift in the entire goal of your inner life, from the exhausting work of judging yourself to the profound journey of knowing yourself. To understand Jung's perspective, we must first define self-esteem from his point of view. What is it, really? Self-esteem is the ego's evaluation of itself. It is a judgment. It is your conscious mind looking in the mirror and deciding, am I good? Am I worthy? Am I successful? It is fundamentally an act of comparison. The ego, by its very nature, understands the world through division and measurement. It compares you to others. It compares you to your own past self. It compares you to an idealized version of who you think you should be. In this system, your sense of worth is entirely conditional. It is a fragile currency that rises and falls with every external event. You get a promotion, your self-esteem goes up. You get criticized, it plummets. You receive a compliment, you feel good. You see someone else's curated vacation photos, you feel deficient. This is the exhausting roller coaster of a life based on self-esteem. It is a system that is completely dependent on the outside world for validation. It is a mirror that only reflects what others shine upon it. And because the external world is constantly changing, your sense of self, when based on this metric, will be forever unstable. Jung saw this as a profound error in navigation. The ego, the small island of our consciousness, is trying to judge its own worth based on the weather, forgetting that it is part of a vast, stable continent that is unaffected by the passing storms. It is a recipe for perpetual anxiety, a constant, low-grade fear that the mirror will one day show you a reflection you cannot bear to see. Why does this chase for self-esteem ultimately fail us? Because a foundation built on the shifting sands of external validation is destined to crumble. Living a life in pursuit of self-esteem creates predictable and painful psychological symptoms. First, it breeds crippling anxiety. If your worth is based on performance, then every task, every social interaction becomes a high-stakes test. The fear of failure isn't just about the practical consequences, it's about the potential collapse of your entire sense of self. This also gives rise to the imposter syndrome. Even when you do succeed, the inflated ego lives in constant fear of being found out, of being exposed as a fraud, because deep down, it knows its worth is not inherent, but is merely a performance. On the other end of the spectrum, an overinflated sense of self-esteem can lead to narcissism. This is the person who must constantly prop up their fragile ego by devaluing others, demanding admiration, and refusing to acknowledge any personal flaws. It is a fortress built to protect a deeply insecure core. Most of us, however, live somewhere in the middle, on an emotional roller coaster. Our moods are tethered to our daily successes and failures. We are addicted to the high of praise and crushed by the low of criticism. It is an exhausting way to live, a constant battle to manage the fragile mirror. And this, Jung would argue, is the great trap of pop psychology. It tells you that the solution to a cracked mirror is to find better glue, to try harder to piece it back together with positive affirmations or more achievements. But Jung's solution is far more radical. He suggests that the problem isn't that the mirror is cracked. The problem is that you are staring at a mirror in the first place. He invites you to turn away from the fragile reflection and look towards something real, solid, and eternal within you. What lies beyond the hall of mirrors? What is the alternative to this endless cycle of self-judgment? Jung invites us to discover the difference between self-esteem and the self. If self-esteem is a fragile, man-made object that we are constantly trying to build and repair, the self is a vast, natural landscape that has always been there. It is not something you create, it is something you discover. It is not something you earn, it is something you connect with. Imagine a deep-rooted ancient mountain. Its existence and its value are not dependent on the weather. Storms may come and go, clouds may obscure its peak, but the mountain itself remains solid, rested, and unshakable. This mountain is a metaphor for the self. Jung described the self as the central archetype of wholeness, the organizing intelligence of our entire psyche. It is the totality of who you are, your conscious mind, your personal unconscious, and your connection to the vast collective unconscious. It is the whole iceberg, not just the tip. Where self-esteem is an evaluation performed by the ego, the self is the totality of your being, which exists beyond evaluation. It is inherently worthy simply because it exists. This is a staggering concept. It suggests that deep within you, beneath the noisy, anxious chatter of your ego, there is a core of being that is already whole, already complete, and already worthy. The goal of a deep, authentic life is not to convince your ego that it is good enough. The goal is to build a conscious relationship with this deeper self, this silent, powerful mountain within. The confidence that arises from this connection is not the loud, brittle confidence of self-esteem, but the quiet, resilient, and profound confidence of the mountain itself. It is a confidence that does not need to announce itself because it is rooted in the very ground of your being. Let us define the self more clearly. For Jung, the self is the supreme archetype, the central ordering principle of the entire psyche. It is the image of God within us. If the ego is the center of our conscious world, the self is the center of our total world, both conscious and unconscious. It is the unifying force that holds all the disparate and conflicting parts of us in a state of paradoxical harmony. It contains our light and our shadow, our masculine and feminine aspects, our personal story, and our collective inheritance. The self is the true protagonist of our life's journey. It is the wisdom, the wise guiding intelligence that is always pushing us towards wholeness, a process Jung called individuation. The self communicates with us not through logical arguments, but through the symbolic language of the unconscious. It speaks in dreams, in synchronicities, in creative urges, in moments of profound intuition. It is the source of that quiet, inner voice that knows what is truly right for you, even when it contradicts the desires of your ego or the expectations of society. The ego wants security, recognition, and pleasure. The self wants wholeness, meaning, and authenticity. Often the agendas of these two centers are in conflict, which is the source of much of our inner turmoil. The journey of self-realization is the process of aligning the will of the ego with the wisdom of the self. It is the ego learning to listen to, trust, and serve this greater organizing principle. It is the earth realizing its proper orbit around the sun. When this alignment happens, we stop trying to get worth from the outside world because we feel a profound sense of inherent value radiating from this inner center. We are no longer a fragile house of cards, but a deep-rooted tree, drawing nourishment from our own hidden depths. Let's make the distinction absolutely clear. The difference between a life oriented around self-esteem and a life oriented around the self is the difference between a puddle and an ocean. Self-esteem is conditional. The self is unconditional. Self-esteem depends on what you do, what you have, and what people think of you. It is a reward for good behavior. The self exists regardless of your actions, your possessions, or others' opinions. It is your inherent state of being. Self-esteem is an external game. The self is an internal connection. The pursuit of self-esteem requires you to look outside of yourself for validation. You need the applause, the promotion, the compliment. The connection to the self requires you to look within. It is cultivated through silence, introspection, and listening to your own soul. Self-esteem asks, am I good enough? The self asks, who am I? Self-esteem is a question of judgment and evaluation. It is forever measuring and comparing. The self is a question of discovery and realization. It is about uncovering the truth of your own unique nature, beyond good and bad. Self-esteem is fragile. The self is resilient. Because self-esteem is built on external factors, it can be shattered in an instant by criticism, failure, or rejection. The self, being the totality of your psyche, is a deep, stable center. It can experience pain and failure without its core sense of being threatened. It knows that a storm passing over the mountain does not diminish the mountain itself. Pop psychology sells us the endless and exhausting project of building and defending our self-esteem. Jungian depth psychology offers us the profound and healing journey of discovering and connecting with ourself. One is a life of doing, the other is a life of being. If connecting to the self is the goal, how do we begin this journey? If the self communicates in a symbolic, non-rational language, how do we learn to listen? This is where the practical work of depth psychology begins. It is a journey that requires courage, patience, and a willingness to turn away from the noise of the external world and listen to the silence within. The first and most important method is paying attention to your dreams. For Jung, dreams are the pure, uncensored voice of the unconscious. They are nightly letters from the self. Keeping a dream journal and learning to work with your dream images is not about fortune-telling. It is about understanding the hidden dynamics of your own psyche. The self is showing you what is out of balance, what needs attention, what is trying to emerge. The second method is confronting your shadow. As we've discussed in previous explorations, your shadow contains all the parts of you that you have disowned. By consciously and compassionately examining your projections, the things that trigger and irritate you and others, you begin the process of integrating these lost parts of yourself, and this integration is a direct path to the wholeness of the self. A third method is what Jung called active imagination. This is a powerful meditative practice where you consciously enter a dreamlike state and dialogue with the figures of your unconscious. You can ask your fear what it wants, or ask a wise figure from a dream for guidance. It is a direct way to build a bridge between the ego and the deeper layers of the psyche. Finally, connecting to the self means paying attention to the non-rational parts of life. Listen to your body, honor your gut feelings, notice synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem too perfect to be random. Engage in creative, non-goal-oriented activities. These are all ways of quieting the logical ego and creating a space for the wisdom of the self to emerge. What happens to the ego in this process? Does it disappear? Is it destroyed? Absolutely not. In fact, its role becomes more crucial and nobler than ever before. In a life oriented around self-esteem, the ego is a lonely, anxious tyrant. In a life oriented around the self, the ego becomes a conscious and courageous partner. Its job description changes from ruler of the universe to prime minister of the soul. Let's explore this new role. Firstly, the ego becomes the explorer. Its courage is no longer used to build walls, but to venture into the unknown territory of the unconscious. It is the part of us that has the strength to face the shadow and dialogue with the archetypes without being overwhelmed. Secondly, the ego becomes the translator. The unconscious speaks in the symbolic, pictorial language of dreams and images. The ego is the only part of us that can take this non-rational wisdom and translate it into conscious understanding and practical action in the real world. It builds the bridge between inner vision and outer reality. Thirdly, the ego becomes the ethical center. The unconscious contains everything. It is beyond good and evil. It is the ego's responsibility to evaluate the messages from the depths, to integrate what is healing and life-affirming, and to consciously reject what is destructive. It must hold the moral compass, making choices that serve not its own selfish desires, but the wholeness and well-being of the entire person. In this model, a strong ego is essential, not an inflated ego, but a flexible, resilient, and conscious one. It takes immense strength to look into the abyss of your own psyche and not lose your footing. The ego, in service to the self, is the hero of the individuation journey. It is the part of us that does the work, that makes the choices, and that ultimately allows the profound wisdom of our deepest nature to be born into the world. What are the tangible results of a life lived in connection to the self? What are the fruits of this profound inner work? The outcome is not a life free from pain, but a life filled with meaning. It is not a state of perfection, but a state of wholeness. The first and most noticeable fruit is unconditional self-acceptance. You stop the exhausting game of judging yourself. You can accept your flaws, your weaknesses, and your shadow, not with resignation, but with a compassionate understanding that they are all part of a larger, more complex whole. You are no longer at war with yourself. The second fruit is about resilience. When your sense of worth is not tied to external success or failure, you become incredibly resilient. You can take risks, you can fail, you can be criticized, and while it may still sting the ego, it does not shatter your core sense of being. You know that a storm does not harm the mountain. This resilience gives you the freedom to live more bravely and authentically. The third fruit is a quiet, grounded confidence. This is the opposite of the loud, performative confidence of an inflated ego. It is a deep, internal sense of knowing who you are. It does not need to announce itself. It is felt in your presence, in your ability to listen without being defensive, and in your capacity to speak your truth without needing everyone to agree. Finally, the greatest fruit is a sense of meaning and purpose. When you are connected to the self, you feel that you are part of a larger story. Your life is no longer a random series of events or a ladder of ambition to be climbed. It becomes a meaningful journey, guided by a wise, inner intelligence. You feel a sense of being on the right path, even when the path is difficult. This is the profound peace that comes from turning away from the fragile mirror of self-esteem and grounding yourself in the unshakable mountain of the self. We began with a question. What if the chase for self-esteem is a trap? We have journeyed through Jung's profound answer, discovering the crucial difference between the ego's fragile judgment of itself and the soul's deep, inherent connection to the self. We have learned that the ego is not an enemy to be conquered, but a vital partner to be befriended and guided. The path that Jung illuminates is a radical one. It asks us to stop looking for our worth in the mirror of the external world. It asks us to have the courage to turn inward and listen to the whispers of our own depths. It asks us to trust that we are already whole, already worthy, and that our life's work is not to build a better facade, but to uncover the magnificent truth that has been waiting within us all along. This journey is a great paradox. By giving up the desperate need to feel good enough, we finally discover a sense of inherent goodness. By stopping the war against our ego, we finally find inner peace. And by turning away from the exhausting pursuit of self-esteem, we finally come home to our true self. The invitation now is for you. To notice the moments when your ego is judging, comparing, and defending. To meet those moments, not with criticism, but with compassionate curiosity. And to begin, in your own way, the sacred work of listening for the voice of the mountain within. The journey beyond judgment is the journey to freedom.